Hey guys, I just got to interview my friend Matt about his new podcast, History Outside the Beer Goggles. Here's that interview. Hope you like it.
A podcast. I'm gonna minimize myself in a little bit so you guys can see the podcast. But I just want to see how everyone's doing today. But yeah, we're gonna be doing a podcast with my friend Matt. He's gonna be here for like a little short while since he has to leave early. Um, that's my bad. I should have been a little bit more prepared or put this a little bit more advanced. But I basically just want to get this out since it is released today. And I don't know how many of y'all have seen it yet or not. But he did do a podcast, and it is this right here. Oh. No, Spotify. They get it together. History Outside the Beer Goggles by Matthew Dillingham. I am going to be watching the first episode as it was released yesterday, but it was done so it could be released today. Today we're going to be listening to it. We're going to be talking about it, and we are going to be basically discussing how we feel about it. I wanted to talk to Matt about the process behind all of it. The process he went into, like where he came up with the idea, why he came up with the idea, what he's gonna do, what plans for the next episode are, and yeah, and I just want to get into some of that, and just show off his work, man, because he is an awesome dude. I am very excited. I have not actually listened to this yet. So I don't know what. I'm very curious as to how it's even going to start. I got to listen to the intro, which I guess we can listen to before we listen to this, which we listened to on Monday, but this is the intro to it. I love the music. The music's great. But yeah.
Hey there, everyone. This is Matt Dillingham. This podcast will be following the Second World War month by month in an effort to shed light as best I can on all the fronts of the war and give the best retelling of history so that we as a people do not forget one of the most influential and critical points in world history. The show will come out at least once a month with possible bonus episodes when there's just too much to cover in one show. I will get into the nitty-gritty of what the show will cover in the first episode, so be sure to check out the show on SoundCloud and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. I'll see you soon.
So that was it, and the rest is just music and stuff like that, which is really cool.
Well, I'm glad you like it.
Hey, Matt. Oh, man.
What's up?
Okay, so yeah, I really do like it. I'm excited to listen to the first episode. So I got obviously a few questions for you, and I just want to know what made you come up with this? What made you want to do this podcast? Why World War II specifically?
What really got me into it was just like seeing the amount of history and the amount of stuff that people weren't learning anymore, and seeing the fact that the disbelief or the non-believing that the Holocaust is on the rise, and that really made me angry, I guess, just because it's a major point in history, and people are believing that it never, which I think is unacceptable, given how horrible of an atrocity that it was. And so I decided to do the podcast because
You're cutting out on me, buddy.
and I had an interest in just doing something with my history degree other than sitting on it and staring at it on a wall. But no, in general, I decided I wanted to do a podcast because I love World War II, and this year is the beginning of the 80th anniversary of World War II, so I thought it'd work perfectly.
Awesome. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, my question is, and I don't know how you're gonna even start. Like, I don't know. Like, I was trying to think of World War II is such a massive event, and it's such a blurred line of, for me at least, where it started. Because there's like the point where America started. There's the point where Adolf Hitler rose to power. and it for me, starting World War II has always been a blurred line. Like, where do we consider World War II to be the official start? Do we count all the stuff that happened prior to the actual war, like the first invasion and stuff like that, or do we just wait until America jumps in? Like, where does this all start?
That is a question that a lot of historians fight about, and a lot of history geeks scream and fight about. Because if you look at all the prelude to war and everything like that, you can see that Japan was already invading Manchuria and was invading Japan by 1931 and 1937. And so
Wow.
and that was about the time, well, 1937 was when Japan began their invasion of China, but that was also the time when Hitler was beginning his expansionist policies and moving back into the Rhineland. He began to take over Austria in 1938, and then by 1939 he was demanding the Sudetenland and everything like that, or it's the beginning of 1939. And so you could argue that it began when Japan invaded China in 1937, but most people I would say the vast majority of historians agree, or at least come to the consensus, that it started when Hitler invaded Poland in September of 1939. And that was when people just generally, I think, agree that that's when it started, because until that point there was not a worldwide nation at war with one another. And by that time, Great Britain still had their empire, France still had their empire, so the whole world was at war, basically.
Okay.
And so I follow that opinion too.
Okay, yeah, because I didn't even know about the Japanese invasion into China and stuff like that. For some reason in my head, and I feel like maybe this is true for a lot of people, I had 1933 in my head, I guess because of the Great Depression and stuff like that. And just basically that's what really kicked off the World War, or at least that's what inspired Adolf Hitler and a bunch of other people to be like, no, we need to go at this, we need to make money, we need someone to blame.
Well, 1933 was the year that Hitler was appointed chancellor by Hindenburg.
Mm-hmm.
And so until 1933, Hitler basically did not have any power. He was nobody. He was a rising star, but he still wasn't anybody. He didn't have any levers of power whatsoever until 1933. And then after that is when he basically appointed himself dictator. But until that point, the only real major, like, belligerent-y, aggressive nations were Japan and really Italy. But Italy was was pretty weak. And so, most of the Axis powers,
Axis?
the Axis,
Yeah.
were pretty weak pre-war. Once you actually really look into the history and stuff, they had no business getting into a war at this point. The whole world really had no business getting into a war. And I think the only reason why the world got out of the Depression was because of the war.
Wow. Okay. So what was the research like for this podcast? Because, I mean, it is World War II. It sounds like you did a whole lot of research. What was that like? And how long did it take?
It was extensive. Extensive. It was a lot of reading, a lot of notes, a lot of hours spent hanging out with my computer and a book, sitting at my coffee table, just reading at 5 o'clock in the morning when nobody would bug me. And as for like the extent of it, it was mostly a lot of books from either the time period or just post that to like 1960s. I think the most recent one I did was by the 90s.
Okay.
And most of these books were written by well-known historians such as like Richard Overy and none of the books are around me right now, but Richard Overy is the main one that I look to because his book was very, very thorough with discussing everything in the lead up to the war. His book is called The Road to War. And he basically covers all the major belligerent powers and their like status at the time pre-war and everything that their leaders were doing up until the war's beginning.
Okay, so that sounds like a good start. Did you go to any outside sources, like different perspectives other than like I honestly don't know too much about this. I don't even know if the author you just mentioned was an American author or a historian
He's
from
British.
British. But like, did you go to like any? I mean, I know Germans are very big on like that never happened. We're gonna try and like leave that behind us. But did you go to any other outside sources, any other perspectives other than the British or American or any of the Allied powers?
Now, I wouldn't say that Germans try and say that this never happened. That's a bit of a stretch. They fully acknowledge that what they did happened, but they are not proud of it. And they try to push it into the past and show who they are now. I wouldn't say that they say that it didn't never happen.
Okay.
But I tried to do more outside sources, and there's a lot of good stuff from Germany and a lot of good books from Germany. But I have one major problem in that I don't speak any of those languages. So it's a little bit tough to look at a lot of the sources that are non-English. And unfortunately, the English ones are the British and American. And so they're mostly what I get to go through. I have some like friends in Italy and stuff and in Germany that could possibly help me. But other than that, I'm going mostly from British sources. And luckily, British historians are relatively objective.
Okay.
There's still, you can obviously, when you're reading it, you can see some of this, the
Biases.
the embellishment and stuff, and
Yeah.
biases, but in general, the British sources are pretty objective.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm very excited for a lot of this stuff. So yeah, and I just realized there's dirty laundry right behind me that I need to put in the laundry as we're
It's all right.
talking about all this.
My dirty laundry pile is much bigger than yours, so you're fine.
Fair enough. Yeah, and then I think other than that, this is gonna span over, I guess, 6 years. I know World War II is like the big starting point, especially for the episodes to come right after this first one. Do you have any other type of historical moments that you would like to cover? And maybe some that like no one's ever even heard of that you feel like is not in the popular lexicon or anything like that.
I mean, there's definitely things I'm very interested in. The original idea of this podcast was more going to be focusing on lesser known parts of history, or at least parts of history that are not either regularly told or regularly undertold in like history books and in the general things. That was the original premise. And once I learned the extent of the research process that it would take to do that every single time, I kind of thought that's a bit much of an undertaking for a person who's never done it before.
Mhm.
So I decided to change and do the World War II thing, because I know a lot more about World War II already, and I know the type of sources and the things that I'm going to be looking for in that. So that's why I switched over to that. But as to like things I would be interested in, I definitely love the like technology. I love the just like the espionage and the political theater that goes around when things are happening elsewhere, and those things are generally the type of things that don't get talked about as much, or the home front and stuff. So I think it'd be kind of fun to talk about, you know, the technology during the First World War or something, because that just fascinates me. That the beginning of the war, the best way that you could get a message from point A to point B was writing a letter, giving it to a guy, and he runs for 10 miles, or rides a horse for 10 miles. And that was the best way that you could get a message from point A to point B. But then by the end of the war, you had the the Triple Entente. You had the Entente
Huh?
having wireless radio by the end of the war. And so the development from, you know, James over there running 10 miles to I can now talk 100 miles without wires is just amazing to me. And so that'd be a thing that I would love to cover at some point. I don't know when, but at some, probably once I get a good formula down for this, then maybe I can expand.
Okay, that would be really awesome. I'd look forward to all of that. So, and then the follow-up question was like, is there anything that you feel like is not in the general public, like something that like is swept under the rug in a lot of history books, especially when we were in high school and stuff like that? Because I know there's a lot more, especially now that we're discovering new things, new documents, and every single day it feels like, oh, we've uncovered something new, and what we knew before, void that. Now here's this new information that says this is what really happened. Do you feel like there is something that you would like to cover that maybe people within like the normal people don't really know about?
Are you talking about like specifically for World War II or just in general?
In general, I don't want to like I am super excited to hear the podcast, but also I don't want to do any spoilers because I feel like anything that we don't know you've covered in your podcast. But if not, you can more than welcome to answer for both World War II and just in general history, like World War One, or maybe a war we've never even heard of that was very impactful just in a small way.
So let me make sure I'm getting your question right. So, like, are you asking me basically like, what things do I think people need to know that we don't normally talk about?
Yeah, something that's not normally
Okay.
talked about or is not really known that you
Okay.
think is important historically, that just isn't talked about.
I would say I'll start with the World War II just because that's what's all in my head at the moment. Probably the just straight up the viewpoint from the Axis, from the Central Powers or the Axis powers.
Mhm.
Their viewpoint is, I wouldn't say seldom told, but it's not as well known, obviously, as like the American standpoint, because American textbooks like to very much embellish and over what's the word? We like to oversay what we did. We did a lot in the Second World War. We did a lot, but there were a lot of things that we also did very badly that we don't talk about because it would tarnish our image of basically us being a savior during the war.
Mm-hmm.
But so I would say probably look at it a discussion from the other side, where what we would call the enemy side, and see what their standpoint would be. As for history, there were like, other times other than the war, I think it'd be very interesting to talk about, like smaller conflicts around the world, like the when we were getting into Vietnam, we mainly got into Vietnam because the French had pulled out, and we were doing this domino effect where we were scared that if one country fell to communism, the rest around them would continue and continue, and the dominoes get bigger until everybody was communist.
Mm-hmm.
And so the U.S. was implementing this policy to try and contain it at that one place and fight it so that the domino effect wouldn't happen, basically. But the thing I think we don't talk about is everything before the U.S. got there, which was the Vietnamese wanted freedom. After World War II, World War II basically put an end to World War I put an end to empires. World War II killed empires.
Wow.
And reverse that. World War I killed empires. World War II ended them.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire destroyed, the Austro-Hungarian Empire destroyed, the Russian Empire destroyed, German Empire destroyed. The only two empires that survived were Britain and France, and they got bigger after the First World War. Whereas the Second World War, if you look at post-war, you can just see between 1945 and 1960, France and Britain, their empires are basically just exploding at the seams. Like, India was lost. Most of the French colonies all rebelled almost immediately.
Wow.
And so I think if you were to look at, like, let's go back to the Vietnam example. If you were going to go back to the Vietnam example, if you look at everything, because it was at that time it was called French Indochina, and that split up into Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, like 5 different countries. I forget the other, Myanmar, and all those countries basically exploded from French Indochina, and France wanted to keep a hold on them. And that part where France was involved is not as well talked about as the U.S. involvement, because the U.S. involvement was just so much bigger. So I think that'd be a very interesting thing to try and hop into.
Okay.
and
Oh.
probably deadly for my health. But
Well, I mean, don't strain yourself too much. I'm super excited to like listen to this podcast. There's just one last thing I want to say, and it goes back to the Messenger Boy. I don't know where I heard this from. I don't know if I watched a video on it. I read something on it. I like when I go on the internet, I just go down rabbit holes, and I'll end up somewhere where I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. And I don't know if it's World War One or two, but they used to use windmills that basically were like hand signals to send messages, and that was one of the first ways to send messages really quickly along, faster than it would be on horseback. I didn't know if that was something that you came across during your research, or if you had any like information on that. But I just found one that was very interesting.
I wouldn't say you're wrong. I can see that as being very likely that hand signals, flags, lights, everything like that was used. The main thing that would have been a problem, I will say probably happened. 99% chance happened. I can say that the only thing that I would think of as being problematic for that type of thing would just be that a runner, unless the runner is intercepted, you're not going to know what they're trying to say. Whereas with hand signals, flashings, flags, the enemy can eventually kind of decipher your code.
Yeah.
And I can see that as becoming obsolete during the First World War very quickly, with both sides so close together all the time.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and with
But
that,
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying for sure you're probably right. They definitely did that.
oh yeah, no, because I remember because the way it was is this guy invented, and it was ridiculous, but it was like I think it was like I was learning something about telephones, and basically what they did was to send messages hundreds of miles. They built all of these windmills. I don't know if it was in like France or it was in Britain or something, but they built all these windmills. And these windmills, basically, you pull on levers, and they would make the windmills be in a certain position. So you'd have like something like this, or something like this, or they'd be facing however. And they would send these messages, and then there'd be another person in the windmill. They'll see what the windmill's facing, and they'd mimic it. And basically, it seems ridiculous. And I was like listening to this, I'm like, no way they actually did that, because that would just be so tedious to like basically mimic all of these windmills all the way across hundreds of miles across. But then I thought, oh well, that is faster than a guy running 100 miles on horse or what have you. And basically they said it was pretty solid for I think like a year or 10 years. I forgot what the numbers were, and I know that's a big gap. But it was good. And then what brought it all down was one of the enemies actually hijacked one of the windmills and started just giving up random signals other than the signals that were being sent. So the messages got intercepted, and they were getting like wrong information on the other end. But it was just one of those things that I found super weird and fascinating, and I was just like, did they really actually do that? So I was curious if you came across that on your research. But yeah,
I did not, but I'm sure it's in a source somewhere, and I'll probably find it eventually if I look into it.
No worries, man. Well, I don't know how long you have, but I do know you have somewhere to be. So with that and all of my questions answered, and I don't know if anyone in the chat has any questions while Matt's here. And if you say questions, I'll maybe save them for another stream, and perhaps Matt can answer some of them. But I am going to actually go into the actual podcast. And if you guys want to follow it, I'm doing it on Spotify just because, Twitch and Spotify, I guess, have this cool agreement with each other. But you can also check it out on iTunes. And what are some other places they can check it out, Matt?
You can find it on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes. I would say it's podcast.com, but it's kind of garbage. So maybe not suggest that one as much. But those are the big three: iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud are the three main places you can find it with ease.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Spotify is probably the easiest just for everybody, just because Spotify is basically available on all devices. So I would highly recommend checking it out on Spotify.
Awesome. And yeah, and if you want, he is hosting me right now, but if you can go follow Matt Dellingham, I love that pun. If you can go give him a follow or check out his stuff, go support him because God knows he needs it. He's super. Well, I mean, more people should. Like, they should really check this out. And they should support you. I mean, you put so much work into this, and I find it absolutely fascinating. And I could not have thought of this, so I thought this is. It's very good. So yeah, so let's take a listen.
A little while back, I knew this couple. Suffering these people have gone through.
Hold on, I'm gonna pause it because I just realized I did not give Matt a chance to say goodbye. But if you have, so real quick before we get back into it again, I want to thank Matt. And if you have questions in the chat throughout this whole entire stream that's going to happen, feel free to throw them out there. I will write them down and I'll let Matt know, or and we'll probably do a follow-up stream maybe, depending on what happens. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions. I'll relay them, and hopefully we'll get some answers. But other than that, just go follow Matt, History Outside the Beer Goggles on Spotify. Matt, I really want to thank you for joining us.
No problem. My pleasure.
Anything you want to say before you leave?
I think I am all set. Just be ready, because in 1 month's time, I'm right back at
it. Awesome. All right.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Thank you very much.
No problem. Later, man.
Right. Later.
And with that, let's get back into it. I was too excited to listen. I was too ready. Here we go.
I've gotten through.
The sun is like blasting in my eyes. Anyways, that was my interview with Matt about his podcast, History Outside the Beer Goggles. Please go check him out on Twitch at Matt Dellingham, on Spotify, History Outside the Beer Goggles. I know episode 2 is out. Episode 3 is coming. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. Click a like, click a subscribe if you like the video. Hopefully I'll have more videos. This is just me testing some stuff out. And I'll see you guys all next time. Rock on.